150 years ago, Karl Marx published his first volume of Das Kapital. I'll be finding out how Marx's ideas on ecology are highly relevant to today's debate on climate change. And in our current series on the Belt and Road, we'll also be hearing how a Russian who grew up in China sees himself as one of the benefactors of the Belt and Road initiative. Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. 2017 marks the 150th anniversary of the publication of the first volume of Karl Marx's great work Das Kapital, and people are revisiting his thoughts to find some answers to the problems we are facing today. Marx talked about the rift when, with the first industrial revolution, we switched from burning wood to burning fossil fuels. What kind of new rift are we facing with now? I talked with Graham Murdoch, a professor of culture and economy at the Department of Social Sciences at Loughborough University in the UK, and an expert on Marxism. He has applied Marx's analysis on ecology in the context of climate change in a speech called Communications and Climate Crisis: The New Rift. I asked him about the main messages he wanted to share with his audience. We also talked about how the digital economy is highly relevant to the discussion on climate change.
Marx lived in the 19th century, and he was particularly concerned with what was happening as so many people poured into the new cities and what was happening with agriculture. One of his insights, very important insights, was that what was happening was there was a movement from natural forms of fertilizer to chemical fertilizers. And this is what he calls the new rift. That people's relationship to the land was being broken. It was being industrialized, it was being mediated by chemicals. Instead of using firewood or water, natural forms of power, wind power, windmills, water mills, we used coal and then later oil.
Did he see any answers or clues to answers to this problem in his
No,
mind?
because he was very good at analysing what was in front of him. He was a little bit vague about the future. So you cannot read Marx for a kind of diagram of what the future should look like. Basically, his idea of the future society was a future of cooperation and a future of a more cooperative relationship with natural resources. So he was very sensitive to that. But unfortunately, he never elaborated his ideas very clearly on that.
Now, we are talking about a kind of a reversal of the situation, right? Now we're trying to go back from the fossil fuel, back to the natural sources of energy you were describing. How do you look at the present stage?
I think we're at a crucial moment of. It could go either way. We're going back to those forms of energy that were dominant in the pre-industrial era: wind, sun power, water, and so on. That's absolutely necessary. There's a very important scientific paper written by an American, Michael Mann, and what they did was to try to measure the temperature of just above the Earth's surface over 400 years. What it shows that up until the end of the 19th century, you have a more or less flat, it's a little bit variation, then it suddenly shoots up. It's called the hockey stick because it's got that shape. So we know that that's happened, and more recent analysis shows it's got much worse since the 1970s. We're accelerating global warming. The question is, can we stop it? And that's very debatable. Maybe we can't. Some scientists believe we can't, but we can make it much slower.
That's what governments have been trying to do, and that's why we had this very famous Paris climate change meeting, which produced this Paris Agreement. However, we're seeing positions of big countries shifting at this moment from the United States. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to roll back Obama-era greenhouse gas emission regulations, and also he threatened to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. China's position has been consistent. Chinese President Xi Jinping said in Davos that we must stick to the Paris Agreement instead of walking away from it. What do you think of big countries' role in combating climate change, and what do you think of the different positions?
I would applaud very much the Chinese position. That's absolutely the right thing to do. the big countries have a double responsibility. First of all, they are themselves big contributors to the carbon emissions, but more than that, they have a leadership role, because if they don't do anything, smaller countries will say, well, why should we bother? Yeah. And that's why Trump's decision is so important, because people say, well, the United States is not going to do it. Why should we do it? Mm-hmm. And so it's a disaster, an absolute disaster.
Yeah, well, he has also been talking about bringing jobs back to the United States, to reopen the coal mines and starting these jobs in the coal-powered manufacturing jobs. What do you think of that? Is it feasible, first of all, and is it wise?
No, it's not feasible. If you look at all the evidence, the coal industry has been declining for some time. There will not be very many jobs in the coal industry. Also, it's becoming more and more mechanized. So they're using machines. Mm-hmm. So it's a fantasy. The more productive thing to think about is how to have ecologically sustainable jobs. And actually the new energy systems are creating a lot of jobs. Coal mining will have to disappear. But that doesn't mean to say those people cannot have any jobs. They can have jobs in clean energy. Mm-hmm. So I think the more advanced thinking in the United States is to think about reorienting the economy, not just around clean energy to supply other sectors, but itself as a major industrial system. Yes. Solar panels, wind power, and so on.
Right now, we know that the concentration of capital has led to these giant multinational corporations, and often in the oil and gas industries. What is the impact of capitalism on climate change, and why is it so hard to switch from oil back to more natural resources?
Well, my next book is called Carbon Capitalism. Capitalism is the problem. When capitalism originated, there was a decision to use coal as the major source of power, and then later oil. Remember, the very first automobiles, the very first cars, were actually electric cars. They weren't driven by the internal combustion engine. And it was because oil was discovered in California that they decided to switch to that system, because the oil companies wanted a market for their oil. So we could have had electric cars at the beginning of the 20th century. Imagine what that difference that might have made. Well, what you have are these enormously powerful companies that have been there a long time, and they have incredible political influence, particularly in the United States. And so it's very difficult to shift the politics, because certainly on the Republican side of the US political spectrum, the oil industries and the coal industries have incredible amount of power. And a lot of the representatives of a lot of the Republican representatives in Senate and Congress come from regions where those are incredibly important industries. And so they feel that they must defend them. So you have a kind of political blockage. Everybody knows that the science tells us that this is not sustainable, but the science doesn't determine politics.
Science doesn't have the lobbying power.
No. So it doesn't have the lobbying power.
What about the digital media? We don't have the lobbying power, but we are very influential. We reach people when we are, allowed to. What is the role of digital media on climate crisis?
Well, actually, highly problematic. This is a very old. I feel ashamed to own this, but this machine. When you see the advertisements for this, you are not encouraged to ask, where does this come from? This is made up of resources that have to be mined, have to be manufactured. The machine itself has to be made in a factory. It has to be transported, probably on a container ship. And when you use it, you're using a huge amount of energy.
However, the problem really is, and people replace them even before they become defunct.
That's the other problem, that we've been encouraged to throw things away almost on every year. There's a new model.
But there's no way to stop that if you look at the reality. Is there a way? Because everybody is trying to get ahead with the latest new gadget. I mean, that's the problem, maybe.
It is a huge problem, but I'm old enough to remember when we didn't do that, when we had a radio and it did all the things you wanted it to do, and you kept it. My family kept their radio for 20 years.
Well, people do turn to listening to radio, but they listen to the radio on their digital devices.
Well, this is part of an overconsumption system, yes? It's not just this. We are consuming too much, and the resources are just not there. One statistic, if everybody in the world enjoyed the same average standard of life as the citizen of California, you would need 5 more planet Earths. We only have 1. So we cannot carry on consuming in this way.
So we have a real paradox. I mean, on the one hand, we want everybody's life to improve, and that, in today's world, will have to be done through the digital way, more or less, and the digital economy is becoming more and more important. On the other hand, we also have this environmental problem. Where is the way out?
Well, one is about how you measure a good society. At the moment, or a successful society, at the moment we measure it in terms of productivity, gross national product. But we could measure it in terms of quality of life. And if you measured it in terms of quality of life, then you have a different ranking of societies. Some poorer societies, people are much happier, they have a much better quality of life socially and personally. So that's one thing. Maybe we have to think about what we're aiming for, not just more and more productivity, but a quality of social life. The other thing is, for me, I grew up in Britain when we had a lot of state ownership of key facilities like the telephone network and so on. I think we have to go back to much stronger regulation of these facilities and much stronger public intervention. You need an internet, but who should control it and who should be accountable? I certainly don't think it should be Google and Facebook. So I think we have to, in a way, go back to that idea. There are certain key resources that support all of our lives that should be held in common. They should not be...
That's free, that's public, that's good for everybody.
Yes, and they should be regulated in the public interest, not just to make money.
Finally, how can we build a better communication system, meaning public opinion in this regard, to help regulate the climate change?
It's interesting that in recent months, scientists have begun to form themselves into an organization. They're so depressed by the bad coverage or the stupid coverage of scientific ideas, they're now going to be proactive and collaborate with journalists and so on. And as people who are primarily responsible for communication, myself in the university and you in a much bigger forum, we have a particular responsibility to make the evidence available to people, but also to explain the arguments. If we do not do it, no one will do it.
And here is my point. Over the past 3 months of Donald Trump's presidency, we have become used to seeing his about turns on so many of his previously espoused policies. But one of the things he has not changed his opinions about is his stance on climate change. Not only is he trying to reverse many of President Obama's ecological policies, but he's also wanting to opt out of the Paris Accord on climate change. His slashing of funding for scientific research further undermines the ability for science to have its voice heard and to serve as the basis for policy making. Meanwhile, the urge to go back to mining for coal is an even further disturbing signal. Now, Karl Marx advocated a respect for science and nature as a basis to guide our actions, although of course he never had to face the problem of climate change. As far as I can judge, this starting point will still appear to be very relevant as ever before.
The Belt and Road Initiative is truly a project of unprecedented scale. What interests me is who is the true benefactor of the Belt and Road Initiative, and that is the common man. Even companies like mine, we have been a direct benefactor of the Belt and Road Initiative because companies have more interest in how this initiative can help them and how can they be a part of it. Being a Russian citizen, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative gave me spectacular new opportunity to connect with my country through establishing ties with Russian SOEs, Russian businesses, of all sizes.
Sid, thank you very much for joining us. Tell us about your story and your connection with the Belt and Road Initiative.
My family came to China in 1996 because my father was a journalist and he was a sinologist as well. So he studied China, Chinese culture, Chinese language, Chinese history. So it was always his dream to be part of China. I was born in North Korea because at that time that was the closest point where he could place his roots, so to speak. But in '96 we have moved with our entire family here. So I grew up here, went to Russian embassy school, and let's say became part of the Chinese wonder and saw the entire change with my own eyes.
What is your connection to the Belt and Road Initiative?
We have established a company in 2015 that actually caters to Belt and Road Initiative countries. And we provide business consulting, cross-border investments, and financial advisory.
What made you came up with this idea?
When I was back in studying in Peking University, as Olsons, we kind of help out, you know, here and there in our free time to do procurement and, like, you know, do with negotiations or some level of translations. And by the time I already finished Peking University, my partner has just visited the first forum for Belt and Road Initiative in Astana, where President Xi Jinping said the most famous speech about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Back in 2013?
Back in 2013. And he came back very inspired. And even though President Xi Jinping has a lot of good speeches, that felt different. That felt, it was concise, it was concrete, it was strong, but at the same time it was very touching. So he came back full of energy, and we thought that this is something very interesting, and it's historic, so to speak. So we wanted to create a company that caters specifically to those ideas proclaimed by President Xi.
But why did you want to jump onto that idea? I mean, it took other people several years to realize how important it might be, and immediately you saw the value of this concept, of this initiative.
I would say it goes back to my life here as an expat, and you always lack the connection with Chinese people. There's always this distance, this gap. And
because you live in a relatively isolated compound.
Either you live in an isolated compound, or just culturally speaking, it's very difficult to bridge that gap. And but when you do, it is the most powerful emotion. When you succeed at that, and you actually make a Chinese friend or a Chinese partner, it's one of the most amazing feelings. And when we heard, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, it just made perfect sense. It was a tool set that would allow people to connect in a more meaningful way. And it felt right, it felt timely, and it was, I think it would be stupid not to jump into that new current.
What is your understanding of the Belt and Road Initiative?
It's connection.
Connection of what?
Connection of people and cultures, I would say.
Not business, not trade, not infrastructure?
That always happens. I think that's a side effect, so to speak. Opportunity is always there. But once you have to establish a relationship before you can share an opportunity together. And Belt and Road Initiative, I think it succeeds at both. Again, being an initiative, right? It's a very soft structure. And there's so many projects underneath it. It's very broad, it's a very trendy term.
Yeah.
But Belt and Road Initiative is that vein that allows to transcend that idea to other places. That opportunity is best when it is shared. So we are all more happy when we have a successful collaboration instead of being isolated in our own fear, thinking that something will be taken from us, so we're not going to share that same success. I wouldn't say that my case is unique, but there's many people like me that are on the same bandwagon. They don't know yet that it's called Belt and Road Initiative. Okay. So the spirit of Belt and Road Initiative was always there. It's just there's never been a structure that you can be a part of and feel supported. And I think that's what's very special about, that everyone can be part of it. Whether you're a foreigner here and you used to feel a little bit alien here, but now you can also tap back to your country and back and forth. Whether you're a Chinese studying abroad and thinking that you should stay there, but now you have the opportunity to come back as well. So it creates this, you know, this mixing, this constant flow of ideas, thoughts, and stories.
How are you making the best use of this initiative to connect companies in China and in the Eurasian part of the world?
Before, it was just like deals here and there, let's say even before the Belt and Road Initiative. But they gave us, you know, an insight. We've built trust with our Russian counterparts, with our Tajiki counterparts, Kazakh counterparts. Right now we have projects from a lot of countries along the Belt Road Initiative. And it's easy for us because they're all post-USSR republics. So we kind of share a similar network today. Project by project, trust is being built very slowly. But we started with oil gas sector. One of our first clients actually was a medium-sized oil and gas company in Russia. And they heard about the Belt and Road Initiative, and they had a very interesting investment proposition in the downstream sector. And they were like, guys, can you help us out? You know, how can we tap into these financial resources and into this vast, you know, political incentive, right? So project by project, that one, they also had like a lot of trading ideas that they wanted to share with China, see if they can sell some products. So we helped them along their milestones, so to speak, and achieved good results.
Was it good?
It was good, but you know, we're still, as consultants, you still operate in a particular field where you're affected by markets, right? So after oil price collapse, I would say a lot of oil deals are very difficult to manage, to do. A lot of people kind of pulled out and wanted to wait it out because it's a completely new reality from an energy perspective. So Belt and Road Initiative kind of helps that to move forward. So in the past 3 years, there have been 2 banks established, investment banks, that follow the Belt and Road Initiative, 1 regional bank. That's unprecedented. There's a lot of infrastructure projects happening, and slowly but surely, a lot of investment resources are opening up.
I wanted to pick up on what you said about the energy prices, and this is actually one of the questions people are asking, because we want to promote cooperation, let's say, with the Eurasian part of the world in energy sector. However, things would not always work out the way we wanted. For instance, when you have this kind of market factor that is uncontrollable, how can you still push forward the cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative? And for companies that are working under this framework, what is your response to that?
I think that a lot of energy cooperation always revolves in the high echelons of power. So leaders are always involved, like big SOEs are involved, big state-run companies are involved. So this kind of collaboration was always there. It was been always present. People always kind of, you know, sold oil here and there. It's just super tough, and it requires, of course, you know, for example, President Putin to meet with President Xi and establish that level of connection, and only then energy ties are promoted. But Belt and Road Initiative opened a whole brand new market for small and medium-sized businesses. So we're not limited anymore to you know, oil and gas industry or energy industry. Even though it's hindered by market conditions, I think Belt and Road Initiative opened up a lot of new projects in completely new sectors. Consumer, for example, or you know, infrastructure projects. Again, there was also a huge side to political will. But when it comes to tourism or cultural initiatives, this is all very new. And this is maybe not as profitable as huge energy projects, but for the people, it's more beneficial. And for cultural exchange, which I think is at the foundation, and it is the mission of Belt and Road Initiative, and it is something very emotional and close to our hearts, that is what is interesting. And this is the new kind of, the new tools that it's bringing to the game.
You talk about cultural connections. Indeed, we have a lot of cultural affinity, let's say, with the former Soviet countries and with Central Asia. Do you think it is a convenience for us to how should you say, promote the initiative, or what could be the possible downsides in this part?
from my perspective as a Russian citizen, even though we have those ties, Russia has shifted so much to the west, and Moscow still is a European city, even though Siberia is right next door of China, it's right next to Harbin, right? Yeah. But all the political decisions are made in Moscow, and most businesses are focused on Europe. So for them to kind of change their daily habits, their daily even flight routes, you know, from where it's Moscow-London to Moscow-Beijing, it's very difficult, takes time. So I believe cultural events and cultural projects, that's what's going to change this, because there's so many channels and media talk about the differences we have. Yeah. But honestly, living here as a Russian citizen and traveling with Chinese back to Russia and all over the Belt Road Initiative countries, you realize that we're more similar than people speak about.
So are you doing something on the cultural front if you think this is really important?
We're doing something on the cultural front. We're helping out with a couple of initiatives connected with Expo in Astana 2017. And let's say providing the right marketing support to show our countries and unite them in a meaningful way. Again, to focus on things that are similar and not different. Luckily, in my free time, I had the opportunity a year ago to be part of a documentary made by CCTV about the ancient tea road, which was established, so to speak, in like early 18th century. And it used to be the second by volume after the Silk Road. And we had great cultural exchange, and the documentary revolved around going from Moscow all the way to Beijing by train, by cars, and we looked at sites which are of course not the cities they used to be before.
Since you established your company under the Belt and Road Initiative, or has it been difficult really, and where do you wish to get more support?
So the first client, as I was saying, at the oil gas company, they heard about the Belt and Road Initiative. As I said before, I think the speech that President Xi Jinping didn't just touch us, even though it was more relevant to us. I think everyone who heard it, they're like, oh, okay, this is new, this is something interesting. And it had a ripple effect. And of course that allowed us to have more clients, because we have a very, let's say, niche market right now, because not everyone has the tool set and has the understanding of what the Belt Road Initiative is. But using, let's say, it as our main theme allows us, of course, to tap into much broader clientele.
I arrived in China in 2008.
Claudia Masuga is the only Swiss person in China running a wine retail chain. As a wine trader who imports wines from other countries into China, Claudia believes the Belt and Road Initiative is a positive project as it is bringing the world closer. What's Claudia's story with China, and how will traders like her benefit more from the Belt and Road Initiative? Join me tomorrow to find out on The Point in our special series, The Point and Road's Heart Beats. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the CGTN Live application to watch our show on your mobile devices. For previous shows, go to the CGTN channel of YouTube, click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on CGTN.